Hi, good evening and welcome to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is James Gaddy. I'm the Executive Vice President of Administration here at PAFA. I just wanted to share with you, just for a moment, a little bit about PAFA. Since 1929, PAFA and Penn have shared a coordinated Bachelor's of Fine Arts program. We've paired PAFA's renowned fine arts education with Penn's liberal arts education and provided fine arts students with an extraordinary opportunity to earn a BFA degree while studying at two of Philadelphia's most prestigious institutions. PAFA has also been a very, very long pioneer of women's arts educations. In fact, at our annual show in 1811, PAFA included 6 female artists in that very first show. And we've graduated many, many distinguished women alumna, including Mary Cassatt, Violet Oakley, Cecilia Bowe, and most recently, a 26-year-old graduate named Angelica Aquili Crosby. Angelica recently sold a work at Christie's for $3.1 million. In 2010, Philadelphia art collector and artist Linda Lee Alter designated PAFA as the recipient of over 500 works of art by women and transgender artists. Linda chose PAFA because of our dedication to educating women and African American artists. This gift of American art was unprecedented in scope, theme, and size in PAFA's history. This weekend is one of the last chances to see our World War I exhibition. That exhibition includes work by women artists who were implored to do work during World War I, as well as African American artists who were making a statement about civil rights and how the work of African Americans played a part in World War I. I hope you'll join us, and I hope you'll see that exhibition before it closes next Sunday. We also hope you'll come back in May for our annual student exhibition. Our annual student exhibition is over 1,000 works of art that are for sale by our graduating BFA and MFA students. And they're really extraordinary, talented artists who are showing in that show. And I leave you with this. Angelica, who I mentioned earlier, who just sold for $3.1 million, if you had attended our show 7 years ago, Angelica's work sold in that show for $1,250. So again, it's my pleasure to welcome you and thank you all for choosing PAFA, and I hope you have a great evening.
Good evening again, and I hope everybody is enjoying this beautiful venue. All the artwork is really spectacular. So thank you to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. We are really enjoying this evening very much. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Penn Sirens. Thank you so much, ladies. Come on down. For coming. They are an a cappella group that have actually been to the White House twice, and we are honored to have you here to entertain. And also, just as an aside, TCPW did help them out in transportation getting to Washington, D.C. So thank you, ladies, for coming this evening.
Beneath the sheets of day. she was gone. But after her lover, but after her lover, up into the sky, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down he wandered, 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 while she was missing when he found her. Oh, then they fell a-kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing, a-kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing. Up and down he wandered, 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 while she was missing when he found her. Oh, then they fell a-kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing, a-kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing. All the times that ere I spent it in good company, and all the songs that ere I sung were sung in perfect harmony. And all I've done for want of wit to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night, and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I've had are sorry for my going away, and each companion that e'er I've had would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night, and joy be with you all. Good night, and joy be with you all.
So tonight is a very special night. For me personally, we're honoring somebody who I've grown to know and really appreciate her talents and think she's such a terrific person. So Louise, it's an honor to introduce you to your fellow alumni, all of whom are accomplished women who devote their time and energy to the Trustees Council of Penn Women, an organization that by now you know is centered around women's history. That is, women's history at Penn. You are part of that history, and now you have gone on to make history matter at the New York Historical Society. Before you brought your brilliant organization skills and vision to the society as its CEO and president, the society had declined in prestige and its exhibitions were not historically based. I'd like to cite as an example the first exhibit I saw there. It was on dogs of New York. Who owned them and who walked them? Louise, you took on the challenge of reinvigorating an institution that was wallowing in debt and declining in importance, and launched groundbreaking, exciting exhibitions with the mantra, that history matters, and the New York Historical Society was the place to be to experience that history. I remember when you were being vetted, I spoke to Matthew Goldstein, then the Chancellor of CUNY, the City University of New York, where you were Vice Chancellor, as you heard before. He memorably said, "I hate to lose her. She is the absolute best." He was so right. You started off with a bang by creating the Hamilton in New York exhibit, where a mammoth $10 bill with Hamilton's visage was plastered across the Central Park West facade of the building. Then you invited Secretary of the Treasury Robert Rubin to be honored that year on the 100th anniversary of Hamilton's birth. The city took notice. And let's face it, you celebrated Hamilton before Robert Caro and Lynn Miranda. What a visionary. And the New York Historical Society started its journey back to greatness. Your next big exhibit was Slavery in New York, tackling a topic that no New York institution had ever tackled, drawing classes, high school classes, from all the boroughs, as well as teachers and journalists, historians, and proud New Yorkers who learned the truth of Gotham's involvement. The next exhibit, A New Light on Tiffany, exposed the real talent of Clara Driscoll and the ladies who labored in the Tiffany factory, introducing the exploitation of women who received minimum wage and no recognition for turning out these magnificent Tiffany lamps that still beguile anyone who turns on those lights. Louise, your light is the energy behind all of these great changes, and you have been recognized by the CUNY colleges and the New York Post. Both of these wildly different organizations have their pulse on what is really happening in New York. Yes, there have been other women, great New York women, who have made their mark on New York's cultural landscape. But none will have the lasting impact of your latest inspiration to create a Center for Women's History at the New York Historical Society. This center will be the first of its kind in New York and the nation, and will bring thousands of people to see how women have been a powerful force in the history of the city and the country. And here is where your inspirational beacon and the TCPW Beacon Award intersect. Our award recognizes an outstanding woman who is committed to issues affecting women and to advancing their status. As TCPW celebrates its 30th anniversary, there is no one more deserving than you of joining our previous great honorees who have received our Beacon Award. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Judy. I'm once again completely overwhelmed, and thanks to all of you for honoring me with the Trustees Council of Penn Women Beacon Award. I'm really thrilled to be able to celebrate this award among fellow Penn alumni and friends, including 3 outstanding and female members of our New York Historical Society Board of Trustees, our amazing chair, Pam Schaffler, and my fellow Penn alumni, New York Historical Trustees Judy Berkowitz and Susan Danilo. Now, I know that the Council is celebrating its 30th birthday this year, but I hope you don't mind if I take you back even farther in time, 100 years farther to be precise, when an extraordinary group of women from all parts of the United States, as well as Eastern and Southern Europe, came to New York City to help lay the groundwork that 100 years later would make it possible for all those exception women at Penn and elsewhere to achieve the remarkable things that they have. Let me begin by setting the stage a bit. 15 million immigrants arrived in New York at the turn of the last century, as well as countless others who migrated from farms and small towns to the south and to the west. New York became the second largest city in the world, its starkly different neighborhoods connected by a new subway system, its air converted into real estate for skyscrapers built in the wake of the consolidation of new American industries into powerful corporations. On a smaller scale, recent immigrants sought their own opportunities, starting up hundreds of new businesses. The city was electrified, quite literally. It was also, more figuratively, electrifying. In the stunning emergence of modern times, modern cities, and New York in particular, became the magnetic center of new ways of thinking and working and living, especially for women. Among the newcomers to New York in 1887, 100 years before the council was founded, was a young woman from rural Ohio. Her name, and you've heard it a couple of times already, her name was Clara Driscoll, and she was drawn to the city by her artistry and by the possibilities that she saw in New York for education and for work. We know quite a lot about Clara Driscoll because of the many letters she wrote back home to her family in Ohio. In a thrilled and excited voice, she tells her mother and sisters about the job that she landed after art school at Louis Comfort Tiffany Studios, where she led a team of model makers and designers. "This dragonfly lamp is an idea that I had last summer," she writes. "After the drawing was made on a plaster mold, I took it and we worked and worked on it till the cost built up at such a rate that they had to mark it $250 when it was finished. Everybody thought it was impractical on account of the cost, but it had hardly arrived in the showroom when the public began to praise it. Mr. Tiffany said it was the most interesting lamp in the place." For over 20 years, Clara Driscoll designed some of the most famous lamps that Tiffany Studios ever made, but she was never credited for her work. Mr. Tiffany was, instead. And as was the custom virtually everywhere at the time in those days for women, Clara Driscoll had to leave her job when she became engaged to marry. Even so, the men at Tiffany Studios resented her and her female colleagues. "We've been having a good deal of excitement," Clara writes, "on account of the demand of the glass cutters that the women stop making windows. It was decided today, and the one window which we happened to be making had to be taken down and sent to the man's department. We hear that it is only a matter of time till the men can put the women out of business. Still, the general manager says he would rather see every man in the place out of a job for a year than to see my department disbanded." Clara Driscoll experienced the intoxication of New York at the turn of the last century, a place that was filled with excitement, entertainment, and the opportunity to ride a bicycle on a perfect night, full moon and warm without being hot. We rode up in the neighborhood of 125th to Grant's Tomb and Riverside Drive. Here, there were thousands of wheels or bicycles, and it was a great sight. But 2 out of every 3 New Yorkers at the turn of the last century lived a very different kind of a life, inhabiting filthy and overcrowded tenements, lacking safe water and basic sanitation. For many educated women who came to New York at the time, the opportunities that the city offered resided in helping the underserved. Lillian Wald came from a middle-class family in upstate New York. She was stunned by how many infants were dying in the tenements she visited, how many children and their parents were racked by disease. Over broken asphalt, over dirty mattresses and heaps of refuse we went, she wrote. There were 2 rooms, and a family of 7 not only lived there, but shared their quarters with boarders. I felt ashamed of being part of a society that permitted such conditions to exist. What I had seen showed me where my path lay. Lillian Wald moved to the Lower East Side and opened the Henry Street Settlement House with the support of Jacob Schiff, a banker and philanthropist. And here is the Henry Street Settlement, which still stands today. Her idea at the time was radical. She established a link between living conditions and the spread of disease. And she created an organization of community-based nurses who visited thousands of families each year, pioneering the concept of public health. At the same time that Clara Driscoll was designing lamps at Tiffany Studios and Lillian Wald was addressing the health and welfare of tenement dwellers on the Lower East Side, a steady stream of African Americans already resident in Manhattan began to move uptown. They were drawn by available housing and reaction to prejudice in other parts of the city. Thousands more African Americans migrated during the first decades of the 20th century from the South, fleeing oppression there. The kinds of jobs that Clara Driscoll and Lillian Wald occupied were mostly closed to women of color, so that many African American women had no choice but to live apart from their own families and children as live-in maids and domestic help for white families. Support came from within the community as it had for centuries. Women banded together through churches and other social groups. They helped to forge new organizations, including the NAACP and the National Urban League, and they helped to lay the groundwork for an epic battle for civil rights in this land of the free. Addie Hunton, an educator, suffragist, and political organizer who was born in Virginia, but who moved to New York from Boston, where she'd grown up, wrote, "The colored woman, in common with thousands of her sisters, gives her energy largely to the development of the highest qualities of mind and soul, for these alone can give to the nation the best there is in citizenship." The community that women like Addie Hunton nurtured would eventually grow into a vibrant center for African American culture and artistic expression in New York. It was young women, teenagers really, who were the heart of the labor force in the brutal, treacherous factories of New York's turn of the last century booming garment industry. These young women were called working girls. Most of them were recent immigrants from Europe and Italy. They pushed to be included in the industry's struggling labor movement. They paid a bitter price. Clara Lemlich was beaten by thugs hired by employers when she organized picket lines. They broke 6 of her ribs. Weeks later, she became impatient when veteran male leaders seemed too cautious. She spoke out, in Yiddish actually, at a mass meeting. "I have listened to all of the speakers, and I have no further patience for talk. I'm a working girl, one of those striking against intolerable conditions. I make a motion that we go out on a general strike." The next morning, thousands of women garment workers went on strike. In the bitter cold of the New York winter, the women persevered for months. And then women garment workers right here in Philadelphia and in Chicago also mounted massive strikes. The New York women achieved some gains, but they were not included when male union leaders negotiated an end to the strike. And there was no resolution of the women's essential issue, workplace safety. At the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, women workers needed permission to speak. The electricity for the sewing machines was deducted from their pay. Every scrap of cloth was saved, and the scraps accumulated throughout the factory. On an early spring afternoon in 1911, the piles of rags caught fire. There was no alarm system. Flames roared up one stairway. The door to the other was locked. When some terrified workers scrambled onto the only fire escape, the flimsy, poorly anchored structure collapsed. Frances Perkins, who had watched the horrifying scene from below, worked with New York political leader Al Smith to convince a reluctant legislature to establish groundbreaking new regulations that are, to this very day, the foundation of workplace and building safety across the nation. This was democracy in action, and yet not one of these women could vote. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century and the first 2 of the 20th, ordinary women navigating the shifting seas of a new era, together with women leaders like Lillian Wald, Addie Hunton, Clara Lemlich, and many others, transformed New York and the nation. And yet, it was only with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which guaranteed women's suffrage, that these women and all other women, comprising 1/2 of the American population, became full American citizens with a right to vote. The stories of women who lived a full century before the Trustees Council of Penn Women was founded have particular meaning today as we celebrate the Council's 30th anniversary. In 1987, the year of the Council's founding, the Supreme Court ruled that Rotary clubs had to admit women. 1987 thus marked another surge in the great cascade of constitutional decisions that promised a permanent end to discrimination and exclusion. It was in 1987 as well that Aretha Franklin became the first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, at long last realizing the grand ambition of the spirited women at the turn of the last century, artists, writers, intellectuals, and political activists who challenged any tradition that limited the full humanity of women. Now leave it to a Penn girl, or woman, as we would say these days, to be part of a leadership team, including Penn women, Susan Danilo and Judy Berkowitz, and many of you around the room, as well as our chair, our great chair, Pam Schaffler, a Simmons graduate, to found the first ever Center for Women's History within the walls of a major museum. Our project at New York Historical, like the Council's founding, is another milestone in the recognition that women's rights are essential to the promise of American democracy. So let's have a quick look now, an hors d'oeuvre really, at a sizzle reel that will give you some sense of the brand new film that will orient visitors to the stories that I've told tonight and to the reason why this celebration of the founding of the Trustees Council of Penn Women is a wonderful companion piece to the opening of New York Historical's new Center for Women's History. So I'm cueing the sizzle reel. Sizzling, I hope. Is it coming? Good, okay. Sounded like the right music. We'll give it another second, and if not, you'll have to see it for yourselves. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next on April 29th. And by the way, if you missed the marvelous World War I through art exhibition at PAFA over the weekend, you can come see it on May 26th. It's opening at the New York Historical Society.
Dr. Muir, from the bottom of our TCPW hearts, we thank you for sharing your brilliant journey with us, for inspiring us to challenge ourselves and to explore paths yet unknown, and for your constant commitment to advancing and promoting women and the unique challenges we face. Most recently, by your work on the National Center for Women's History, something I am certain is on everyone in this room's must-visit list, so we all look forward to that. How about one more show of thanks to our newest Beacon recipient, Dr. Louise Muir. A few housekeeping items before we leave for the evening. Committee co-chairs, please get your notes into Terry. Terry is the best, and I know she will not go to sleep until she's received every last note, so please get those in. There are buses waiting outside. They'll make 2 stops, the first at the Inn at Penn, and the other will be at Annenberg, where we have, as Hilda's mentioned, decided to shake things up, have our nightcap. A big thank you to Lynn Girath for the idea to do this, who is on the Annenberg Board of Overseers, and I will also give a shout out to one of our new members who is also on the Annenberg Board of Overseers and was my college roommate, Marla Wasserman. Breakfast starts tomorrow at 8. It's at a new hotel at 33rd and Chestnut, the Study at University City. I got a sneak peek visit a few weeks ago, and I know you will all agree that it is a wonderful addition to our campus. So I am looking forward to that. I know there can be a bit of a tendency to straggle in, especially after all that we've packed in today, but this will be a panel that you will absolutely want to be on time for. Our panelists represent a much broader view of inclusion than we typically think of. For instance, we'll learn about inclusion as it relates to the trend towards urbanization from Susan Wachter, co-director of the Institute for Urban Research. To quote Susan, "We could build out the earth in a way that will bring more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty." That's inclusion. It's sure to be a fantastic panel moderated by our very own wonderful Leanne Hubner. Yay, Leanne. And just thank you everybody for a great day 1 of our 30th anniversary celebration. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.